Imagine you're the conductor of a train. It's traveling at 60 mph. At the end of the track, 5 workers are doing maintenance. You try to brake, but the brakes fail. The train can't stop. Despair overwhelms you. Then, suddenly, you notice a side track to the right. At the end of that right track, only 1 worker is doing his job. You have the ability to turn the wheel and switch to the right track. So now if I ask, would you turn right? What's your answer and why? In class, when students face this question, most choose to turn right. Only a small group decides to go straight. Why do some people still decide to go straight instead of turning right? The professor presents another scenario. Instead of being the train conductor, imagine you're standing on a cliff. You're overlooking the train as it speeds toward those 5 workers. You want to save the situation, and you notice a very large man standing beside you. You could push this man onto the tracks. This would stop the train and save those 5 people. In this situation, it's still about killing 1 person to save 5. So would you push him? I suspect many people listening would choose to do nothing. And indeed, very few students choose to push the large man. Do you notice the contradiction in your reasoning, or in that of most students? Earlier, many of you agreed on sacrificing 1 person to save 5. So why won't you push that large man to his death to save 5 people? What makes you change your mind here? Students often agree it's about your active involvement in both situations. In the first scenario, your hands are already on the steering wheel. Whether you turn right or not, you're involved. You're effectively choosing who dies. But in the second situation, you have a choice. Actively kill someone or do nothing. To clarify this point further, the professor presents another problem. Imagine you're now a doctor. You have 6 patients waiting for treatment. 5 of them have moderate injuries. They require little treatment time but must be treated today. 1 person has severe injuries. This patient requires immediate treatment, and it will take the entire day to treat and care for them. If you treat the severely injured person, the 5 will die. And vice versa. Do you choose to save 5 people or 1 person? Once again, most of us would choose to save the 5 people. The principle seems to be, it's better for 1 person to die than 5. Here's another scenario. You're a transplant surgeon. 5 patients come to you. Each needs an immediate transplant of a different organ. A liver, a heart, lungs, a pancreas, and a kidney. Then you realize there's a healthy young man at the general health clinic next door. He's just getting a routine checkup. Would you kill that healthy young man to save the 5 people needing organ transplants? Obviously, most of us would say no, right? From these examples, we see a pattern. In some cases, we choose to sacrifice 1 life to save 5. We might even see that as the right action. But in other cases, we refuse to actively kill 1 person, even to save 5. This is where we start to consider the inherent morality of the act of killing itself. Killing for many is wrong in its essence. This contrast highlights 2 schools of moral philosophy. The first is consequentialism. Here we judge an action's morality by its results or consequences. The second is categorical ethics. With this approach, we judge an action's morality by the very nature of the action itself. Now let's delve deeper into one branch of consequentialism. I'll introduce you to its most famous doctrine, utilitarianism. This philosophy, founded by Jeremy Bentham, judges morality based on action outcomes. Bentham believed the right thing to do is to maximize utility. An action is considered right and morally acceptable if it brings the greatest good or benefit to the greatest number of people. Utility in this context is the balance between gain and loss, or happiness and suffering. Any action that increases society's overall utility is therefore what we should do. Let's look at a famous historical case. It consumed a lot of ink back in the day. Put yourselves in the jury's position and consider what you would do. This is a true story. A sailboat encountered rough seas. On board were 4 men: Dudley, the captain, Stevens, the first mate, Brooks, the sailor, and Richard Parker, the cabin boy. Parker was a 17-year-old orphan. He had no parents or family. This was his first sea voyage. The boy hoped the trip would make him tougher, more manly. However, their boat encountered rough seas in open water and capsized. Fortunately, all 4 men escaped onto a small lifeboat. Their only food was 2 cans of preserved vegetables. They had no fresh water. For the first 3 days, they ate nothing. On the fourth day, they opened the first can of vegetables and ate it all. On the fifth day, they caught a sea turtle. They ate it slowly, along with the remaining can of vegetables. By the eighth day, they had nothing left to eat. The cabin boy, Richard Parker, didn't listen to the sailors' warnings. He became desperately thirsty and drank seawater. He immediately fell ill. By this point, the boy was very sick. He lay helplessly at the end of the lifeboat, seemingly waiting to die. On the 19th day, Captain Dudley suggested they draw lots. This would decide who should die to save the rest. Sailor Brooks refused. He didn't like the idea of a lottery for death, so they decided against drawing lots. On the 20th day, with still no sign of a rescue ship, Captain Dudley convinced Sailor Brooks and First Mate Stevens. He argued they should kill young Parker. Dudley said a prayer. Then he used a knife to stab Parker in the neck. For the next 3 days, the 3 surviving men ate the boy's body and drank his blood to survive. They were found and rescued on the 24th day. Later, Dudley wrote in his personal diary that as they were having breakfast on the 24th day, a ship finally appeared. The 3 men were arrested and put on trial. They argued to the court that they acted out of desperation. They felt they had no other choice. They needed to kill and eat 1 person so that 3 could have a chance to live. If no rescue ship had appeared, they would have had to continue killing the weakest of the 3 remaining to let 2 continue living. The prosecution argued that killing is still killing, cannibalism is still cannibalism, and these acts are wrong in their very nature. So imagine you were the judge in this situation. Do you think these 3 men's actions were innocent or guilty, morally acceptable or not? In class, only about 20% of students believed this action was morally acceptable and that the men were innocent. Most students leaned towards the view that it was an immoral action deserving punishment. However, among that 80%, many believed that if consent had been present, for example, if the boy had consented to them killing and eating him, then the 3 men would become innocent. But without consent, if the 3 simply conspired to kill the boy for food, then this action cannot be accepted. On the other hand, many students still believe that even with consent, killing is still killing. Cannibalism still can't be accepted. It's still morally wrong. Speaking of which, let's return to Bentham's philosophy. He believed the right thing to do is to maximize society's utility. In this case, the 3 men all had wives and children at home. The boy, Parker, had lost both his father and mother. So if we look at the big picture according to Bentham's utilitarianism, losing the boy might seem like the better option. And in fact, at the time, public opinion largely supported the captain and sailors. Newspaper headlines also argued that if the 3 men hadn't thought about returning to their wives and children, they wouldn't have resorted to cannibalism. So, in summary, if we follow Bentham's thinking, we might consider these 3 men's actions reasonable and not deserving of punishment. Now, to summarize, there are 3 main streams of opinion that oppose Bentham's thinking in this context. The first opinion is straightforward. It follows categorical doctrine. This means if the nature of an action is immoral, no reasoning can change that. Killing is killing. Even with the victim's consent, or if the decision to kill increases society's overall happiness, it's still wrong. But the question here is, why is the nature of killing considered so immoral? Could it be that each of us humans possesses basic rights that cannot be taken away? The second viewpoint objects. It suggests that if there had been a democratic lottery, then the boy's death wouldn't be morally wrong. But this raises a question. If we consent to participate in a fair game of chance, can that make killing right? The third opposing group believes the action could only be considered reasonable if the boy had consented, if he agreed to the plan to sacrifice 1 person to save 3. So the question here is, why can a simple agreement make even killing acceptable and not immoral? Here we see that even seemingly simple daily events can be viewed from completely different perspectives, and there may not be any single, completely right perspective. In this series, we'll explore political and legal debates. These debates raise questions about moral philosophical reasoning. We'll touch on topics like social justice, free speech versus hate speech, that is, the difference between freedom of expression and statements that attack or insult others. We'll also discuss same-sex love and the moral aspects of cannibalism, as we've touched on in this first episode. That's the interesting thing about philosophy. It makes us reconsider issues we thought we understood completely. Philosophy doesn't necessarily teach us new facts. Instead, it opens up new perspectives on familiar problems. There's a certain risk to philosophy. Once something familiar suddenly becomes strange through a new lens, you can never quite go back to seeing it the old way. A quote that resonates deeply is, "Self-knowledge is like lost innocence. However unsettling you find it, it can never be unthought or unknown." This means when we learn new perspectives on life, we lose a certain original innocence. We can never think as simply again. We'll always view problems in a more multidimensional and complex way. While this sounds interesting to many, another consequence of studying philosophy is that you might start to overthink. We can think so much that we feel we'll never know the right answer. For example, you might say you'd actively turn the train to kill one person rather than let it hit and kill 5 people, right? But what if the person on that side track is your mother, working there? Would you change your decision? Would you kill 5 strangers to save your mother? If you earlier agreed with utilitarianism, caring about society's general welfare, does that reasoning still hold up when you're willing to sacrifice 5 people for your mother? Consider modern examples. If you buy a self-driving car, say a Tesla, imagine a dangerous situation. The car must choose. It could maximize its owner's survival chances. That's you. But this would mean crashing into a group of pedestrians. Or it could avoid the pedestrians, but the car would flip multiple times, and you'd likely die. How should the car's algorithm be programmed to act? Should the person who wrote those AI algorithms for the car be held responsible? You have your reasons for your choice, and I have mine. Each answer, each direction, has multiple sides to consider. Philosophy can help us become better citizens. It encourages us to always try to understand the premise of a decision and its potential consequences. We learn to think more and deeper. Let's explore how far our minds can reason, and let's try to understand why others think differently from us. We'll do this in the upcoming episodes of this Philosophy 101 series. Thank you so much for following along. See you again. Bye-bye.